Hey everyone, I see we have some people filtering in. We're going to kick things off at the top of the hour, 11 Central, 12 for those on Eastern time. So we'll give it just a few minutes, but thank you guys for joining. So we're about 2 minutes out. Can someone do me a favor and just click yes, I can hear you in the chat box on the right-hand side of your GoToWebinar control panel so I can make sure everyone can hear me? Okay, looks good. Thank you. Give it just another minute. Okay, we're at the top of the hour, so let's go ahead and kick things off. My name is Shannon, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar, Prescriptive Analytics, Tackling CPG's Biggest Challenges in 2019. And this is brought to you by RIVERLOGIC, and we are a major player in the global prescriptive analytics space who's been around for about 20 years or so. If you've read Gartner research on prescriptive analytics, you've probably seen our name mentioned a lot in their analyst reviews. We have two executives from RIVERLOGIC who will be your hosts today. The first is Kyle Fisher, who is our sales executive, and Kyle has had various roles in supply chain over the last 19 years, including supporting dozens of clients in the consumer packaged goods space. Kyle, you want to say hi?
Hey, everybody.
Oh, sorry about that. And our second presenter is Aaron Berg, who is our Vice President of Professional Services here at RIVERLOGIC. And Aaron has supported about over 100 prescriptive analytics projects over the last 25 years, and many of which have been in the consumer packaged goods space as well.
Morning, Shannon. Thanks for having me.
Great, and I run marketing for RIVERLOGIC and will be your moderator today. Make sure things run smoothly. So if you do have any questions, you can submit those via the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel, or you can use the chat box, whichever you prefer. We are going to keep all questions for the end, so we'll try to leave about 5 or 10 minutes at the end to cover your questions. But please feel free to submit those as they come up during our presentation. And any questions that we don't cover during the webinar, we will follow up with you via email within 24 hours. So we'll make sure your questions get answered. And also, this webinar is recorded. We'll email that to you within 24 hours of this webinar so you have it on hand, share it with colleagues, and so on. And also, I'd like to point you again to your GoToWebinar control panel on the right side, and you'll see a little section there that says handouts. We have 4 different handouts in there, 2 case studies on specifically prescriptive analytics as it can be applied in consumer packaged goods, and then a really good ebook on prescriptive analytics that we as a company wrote. It's extremely thorough and covers just about anything you'd want to know on this topic. And then we also have the slides to this session in the handout section. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kyle, who's going to talk about some of the biggest challenges facing consumer goods in 2019.
Thanks, Shannon. And again, thanks everybody for joining today. As we talk to our customers and also prospects that we talk to in this industry, you know, we think CPG probably faces some of the most dynamic challenges of any industry. You know, we're all dealing with the challenge and transformation of e-commerce and how it's shifting our business and how we operate. But in CPG, we really see a handful of things that are really stepping out as very unique and very complicated to this industry. We see a lot of different types of buying patterns, not just e-commerce. You know, autopilot consumption is an example where we decide that, you know, we're going to use a certain type of product every month and we just have it set up to deliver. And our customers will talk to us about the fact that, you know, we used to be able to compete, you know, inside the grocery store as folks come in to do their shopping, and we could run different programs, different deals, change our marketing, change our brand, change our color of our product. And that was a way to really generate, you know, demand within that customer base. But these buyers aren't all coming into that store. And like I said, they sometimes are just satisfied with what they have today and aren't shopping that decision. And so as those buyers are changing, they're also looking at, you know, the new buyers that are hitting the market. You know, we talk to customers, and, you know, example I heard is, you know, we used to go into a store and you could go to buy peanut butter and you have, you know, 3 different selections, maybe 2 name brands and a store brand. You go there today and you might have 10 brands, right? There's the local peanut, you know, everybody's has a, as we call it, the micro brews of peanut butter, you know, the local products that are out the marketplace. And you've got buyers that are looking for that and actually willing to pay higher prices. And so our customers talk about the fact that, you know, they got a lot of pressure really from both ends. They've got a pressure to decide if they need to raise prices to compete with those niche brands, or do we work on lowering prices to compete with the store brands, or do we do what we're doing today and really try to focus on managing our cost? And so, you know, all these challenges really boil down to things like a price pressure, a margin pressure, and really, you know, how do we control cost? And as we transition to thinking about, well, then what's the impact on the business and the impact on supply chain? We really start to look at as the dynamics are changing. What we're hearing, you know, really, you know, prevalent in the marketplace is, you know, what we've done and what we have been doing, even though we may have been successful in the past, really isn't working for us today. We have to be more dynamic. We have to make better decisions, faster decisions. You know, our business processes have to change to keep up with these different changes in the marketplace. And so that's really what we're facing, and as we walk through with our customers and again with our prospects, you know, it's how do we tackle that challenge. So I'm going to transition to Aaron, and Aaron's going to actually take us through a couple real-world examples of how we're seeing this play out.
Thanks, Kyle. But before I get started, what I think we'll do is we'll talk through a few case studies that are specifically addressing some of those issues that Kyle brought up, and then we'll talk a bit about some of the solutions that these companies that we've worked through have found, exciting solutions around prescriptive analytics. So let's start off with, go ahead to the next slide, Shannon. Let's start off with our first case study. So this company is a buttery spreads company. So buttery spreads, if you see the butter coils up in the upper left-hand side, are things like margarine or other alternative products to butter that you spread maybe on your morning toast. This is an interesting industry for a couple of reasons. One, of course, as you know, the industry is fairly dynamic. It changes frequently based on things like health trends and whether or not you know, margarine versus olive oil versus this other oil is the popular one of day. It's also an industry where the raw material sourcing has a lot of potential impact on sustainability, different costs in different parts of the world. So I'll tell you a little story about this company. The company is multinational, meaning that their supplies, their production, and their customers are in lots of different countries. But what's interesting about them is they have the opportunity to share customers and products across countries, meaning you could manufacture a product in one country and ship it to customers in another, as long as the brand was correct and it met all of the requirements of the country it was being sent to. And this company, because of that multinational, because of the impact of all the different products changing often, had gotten itself into a situation where they were unsure that they were making the right decisions frequently enough. Their planning processes were driven primarily from an annual plan. So an annual plan would be one which I'm sure you all are familiar with, where you take you build up a demand forecast, what you think you'll need to deliver to your different regions, customers, countries, in terms of product over the next year. You use that demand plan to drive a production allocation or production plan, which plants and which countries will manufacture which products. And for these folks, that exercise happened at the beginning of their planning year. Once, maybe twice a year, it would be revisited. And the output of the plan, as far as the production team was concerned, was that allocation of which products are being made at which plants. That determines, once the product is being made at a particular plant, then now you know which customers you're going to ship to, because they'll be the ones closest to that plant, perhaps, et cetera. And the way they would operationalize that information, for example, is they'd say product A, 70% would be made at plant 1, 30% would be made at plant 2. Now, the issue that concerned them was that as the demand changed throughout the year, they would simply take this 70-30 rule and keep applying it, but that might not be correct. So some of the things that could change, for example, might be raw material pricing. It might be production cost or throughput, or they might have run out of capacity at one plant versus the other. So their real question, and that's what this bubble on the right is do I have an optimal plan? And is my plan optimal when things change tomorrow? So in the sort of modern CPG world, things changing quickly, this idea of being able to not only plan, but plan the best possible way you can as frequently as possible, as frequently as things change. Now, the balance issue is, can I do this and, number one, stay profitable? That's probably the most important driver that we hear out of the marketplace, but also managing some of the things about your business that are either your strategic or your tactical goals, things like meeting sustainability requirements, minimizing costs as they change, throughout the year. So that's the challenge for this team, for this company. Let me talk a little bit, go ahead to the next slide, Shannon. Let me talk a little bit about what they felt they needed to be able to do in order to get a handle on this and start, being confident in their planning processes, that they were making the right decisions. The first is visibility into cost and raw material contract changes. So for this particular industry, one of the more important drivers of cost are raw material prices that are different in different parts or different countries. As I mentioned, they're geographically dispersed. So that means things like olive oil or grapeseed oil or the different raw materials that go into making these buttery spreads are commodities. They have commodity prices that shift. They're subject to things like tariffs. And on top of all of that, their procurement team has contracts with various vendors that have interesting contract terms, like a price might be tied to, tied to a global commodity price, or there might be a minimum volume that you would have to buy each year, but the real decision will be, when do I buy it best in the year? The next little bit is competitive market shifts. I mentioned that the buttery spreads world is one of these where trends and fashions change. If all of a sudden people don't want to use olive oil, let's say, and there's a different oil that's better for buttery spreads, or there's a different trend in health, that can shift the market, a great deal. Or if a competitor comes along with a product that is, trendy and new. I already mentioned tariffs and energy prices are something that's actually interesting because there was a significant variance for them and they were concerned about that. And transportation costs, which is a traditional driver of supply chain optimization, was something that they wanted to be able to understand how that impacted their best decisions with respect to all of these other things at once. And of course, the opportunity to reduce production costs in other ways, maybe performance improvement processes or a Six Sigma process on a production line that could improve throughput and therefore cost per unit. Now, if they felt that if they could have information and have insight into these things, that would really give them the confidence to make right decisions. And what we were able to do with them was help them with a prescriptive analytic system that could do all these things. It could answer these questions. And the key to this prescriptive analytic system is that it was able to understand their business, what their business can do, what's possible within their business, that is, which plants can make which products, what the production throughputs might be, what capacities existed or constraints exist, as well as all the financial drivers that you saw in their needs statement. And this prescriptive analytics platform allowed them to be, number one, confident in the decisions that they were making, meaning this model, this analytic really does understand my business. And number two, and then just as important, especially given the complexity and rapidness of change in their business, help give them the confidence that they were making the best possible decisions that they can. Now, before I go much deeper on that, let's ask a quick question about how familiar folks are on the seminar with prescriptive analytics. But just put a poll up. I'm going to give you 10 seconds just to answer the question. If you guys wouldn't mind, just go ahead and click on one of the answers. Now, keep in mind, we're not talking about predictive analytics. We're talking specifically about prescriptive analytics here. And we'll see what we get. So Shannon, is that enough time on the poll? Great. So let's see what we've got for results. So we have, this is interesting, the majority of the people on the call have not heard of the term prescriptive analytics. So I'll define it a little bit, but there's sort of varying degrees of I've heard the term and really can't define it very well. So let's talk a little bit about what prescriptive analytics is. We won't go too deep, but I'll get you enough of a background. In the case of our first example, prescriptive analytics involved having a tool, as I mentioned, that really understood how the buttery spread business works so that you could ask it for advice. So prescriptive analytics is around analytics tools that can suggest to you the best course of action given what you've told it and what it understands about your business. So let me read just off the screen. This is a really great definition that comes from Gartner. Gartner's been covering prescriptive analytics for a while now, so they really do have their finger on the pulse of what this is. Prescriptive analytics is the application of logic and mathematics to data to specify a preferred course of action. That is, prescriptive analytics outputs a decision rather than a report or a statistic or a probability or an estimate of future outcomes. So to us, what this means is prescriptive analytics is going to enable me to look at a complicated situation and suggest to me what to do to achieve the best outcome, whether it's make the most amount of profit, lower cost, meet all my demand, whatever those goals are in those processes that we're supporting. I think probably what makes sense is to have Kyle give us a little sort of summary of what where prescriptive fits into the analytics landscape, and a little bit about what you're seeing in the marketplace with prescriptive.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, and I think that is probably the first question is why advanced analytics, why prescriptive analytics? I think probably everybody on this webinar probably has some form of analytics in their business, whether it be diagnostic, descriptive or predictive, which is a very common term that we hear and see in the marketplace today. And really, as you move towards prescriptive, as Aaron said, it really is moving from looking at data and making decisions versus looking at scenarios where that data has already been analyzed and decisions have been presented to the user. And as Gartner predicts right now, by 2022, 40% of companies will be using some form of prescriptive analytics. That number today, by the way, is around 11%. So as what we see is that very large spike in demand as a lot of folks are asking questions. I'm not surprised by the poll results. That's really the results that really lay out in the field, which is a lot of people have heard of it, not using it today, and there's still a good large number of folks who haven't really heard of that term. But it really is taking that next step. I'd like to point out that it doesn't necessarily replace what you're doing today in the diagnostic and descriptive world or the predictive world. Those certainly can be inputs into a prescriptive platform. And the real ultimate goal there is really just to take what you're doing today and make it the best possible analytics platform that you could possibly be using. So let's move on to the next slide, and we'll talk about so why prescriptive matters. Why do you use a tool like that? I think Aaron pointed out, a really key part of the definition of prescriptive is applying the data and the math and having a tool to do that. I've got an example on the screen here of a customer's supply chain that we recently optimized. We had 9 factories, 21 sales markets, and 4,000 raw materials, and you can see some of the other details on the screen. But we took their data from procurement all the way through to the sales organization and wanted to optimize an end-to-end supply chain with the goal of minimizing costs. Now, with the factors on the screen and with the variables at play, it's beyond human comprehension to be able to sit down on a spreadsheet and do that math. And even if I had a descriptive tool or predictive tool, it's still going to present me with a lot of data that I'm still going to have to try to make decisions off of. Using prescriptive analytics, we can run those millions and millions of algorithms and come up with decisions that we then can make our decisions off of. In this particular case, this customer was able to find cost reductions in areas that had been unforeseen before because they just didn't have the ability to manage the data. And they were able to find cost reduction, not only now, but making prescriptive analytics a part of their business process going forward allows them to continue to achieve that optimization. So prescriptive is really about being able to take the data from all areas of the supply chain and use it together to make those collective supply chain optimization decisions. So we're going to actually go through now a couple other examples in detail that customers that we've worked with in the past. So I'm going to turn it back over to Aaron, and he's going to take us through that.
Sure, thanks, Kyle. So now we've sort of had the discussion about prescriptive analytics. What is prescriptive analytics? It's that technology that enables you to look through all of the possibilities you just saw on the screen that Kyle was just showing, all the different ways you could run your supply chain and help suggest the best way to run it. Now, once you start using prescriptive analytics, it seems to become pretty addictive to our customers. So I'm going to tell you a little story. We're going to go from buttery spreads to baked goods, and we'll talk a little bit about this baked goods company, which really has become addicted to prescriptive analytics. And by addicted, I mean has found ways to use prescriptive analytics in a lot of parts of their company and different business processes that support decision making. So that'll give you a bit of an idea what the possibilities are of where you can use prescriptive analytics and where it can create value. So a little bit about this company. It's a baked goods company. A couple of the distinguishing characteristics are that they have a small number of factories, less than 5, spread across the country. They have products that have a shelf life to them, that have seasonality to them. They might make certain kinds of products during the holiday season and other products year round. And so they have a fair amount of complexity, but they were not facing the specific problem I described for the buttery spreads company. They had been down the road of doing optimized planning around some of those kinds of things similar to the buttery spreads company, but they wanted to go farther. So their big challenges were really in trying to figure out how to take advantage of this prescriptive analytic power in a lot of different places within their business. So one of the early places they attacked, and this is really a great one for prescriptive, is strategic growth. Strategic growth planning is typically a planning process that gets done on spreadsheets or by way of arguments in boardrooms with very little potential rigor. For them, bringing the rigor of optimization analytics to it allowed them to look out, a number of years, maybe 5 or 6 years on their strategic plan, and this, help make decisions or understand how they would act given certain potential changes in the market. So, for example, if the trend is to sell more cookies or more baked goods, how would they, when would they run out of production capacity? How would they best bring new capacity online and things like this? Well, a prescriptive analytics model that looked out that distance, that understood what kinds of capacities of production, what kinds of revenue they would make off of these products, would help them build that optimal strategic plan, and then run that strategic plan a number of times under different scenarios, maybe different economic or different market scenarios. That way they could settle on a plan today, know how they would change that plan in the future if the world were to change. So strategic growth really can become a analytical process where you've gained confidence in being able to react to the future, to be able to build a plan that is good for the future, leveraging prescriptive analytics. Beyond that, they also said, well, hey, can we use this prescriptive analytics at more detailed levels? Can we go into stuff we do every single day that is complex, and that if we had a prescriptive tool that could tell us how to do something better, we could get ongoing value from it every day. And so one of the use cases that they attacked very early was loading pallets. Now, when I talk about loading pallets, I'm talking about filling up a mixed pallet with different products. For those of you who do a lot of supply chain work, you know that this is a common process. And if they could, this was their contention, if they could do a better job of filling the pallets to full height and filling the trucks more full, they could save supply chain costs. Now that really is a detailed down in the weeds problem. And it's a down in the weeds problem that's complex enough that you can't just come up with the answer in your head, and that having a prescriptive analytics tool that can look through all those thousands and hundreds of thousands and maybe even millions of combinations and give you the best way to pack your trucks is what you would need. So that was another area where they took prescriptive analytics. And probably the most exciting area, at least to me, and maybe to this discussion that we're having, is the use of prescriptive analytics and ad hoc planning. So imagine you have this tool, this prescriptive analytic capability that understands your business and can suggest best ways to run it. Well, what would you do with that capability if, let's say, there were a major market disruption? For example, if a competitor went out of business, or if a health report came out that all of a sudden bread was the greatest thing in the world, so everybody wants to eat bread again. That would potentially be something that you'd want to use prescriptive analytics to say, well, okay, how do we capture value from that, or how do we take over our competitor's space because this other company has gone out of business. And those are the kinds of values that prescriptive analytics can deliver on an ongoing basis. You recall Kyle was speaking earlier about some of the challenges in CPG that are really new. This sort of lots of change and things like market disruption and autopilot buying and that sort of stuff. Well, if you have the ability with prescriptive analytics to run lots of scenarios and to do ad hoc planning, you really can potentially navigate those rapidly changing waters in a better way. And really, if you go to the next slide, Shannon, one of the things that the team at this, baked goods company realized was that by using prescriptive analytics, they were no longer just planning to a particular demand or planning to a particular kind of business. They were really looking at their plans as things that would show them opportunities to do more or to do something different or to expand a market, or to shrink a market, or to build a new plant, or to buy bigger trucks and things like that. And so we've got this great quote from the VP of Planning, and I just thought I'd read that because this is just a fantastic example of what you can get out of prescriptive analytics. He said, one of the key values of prescriptive analytics is the ability to bring our functional teams data that they can make actionable. That we want them to understand the opportunity value of producing or selling one more or one less of that product. And what he's talking about is challenging assumptions, challenging, is that the demand I've been giving, is that the demand I want? The production plan I've been given, is that the production plan I want? Or should I produce one more or one less? Or should I sell one more or one less of that product to have a better plan? And so it really does sort of highlight that particular value of prescriptive analytics that focuses on making and adjusting to the world realities outside of the box, outside of your normal, how do I meet current demand, but how do I make demand better? So that was that was the second one I wanted to highlight, but I think that it might be fun to finish off this sort of food-driven set of examples with a snack. So let's talk about snacks briefly. And there's a reason I'm bringing up snacks here, because there's something that I've learned over the years of consulting, which is whenever I talk to a client or potential customer, one of the early statements that always seems to come up is my business is different. My business is unique. And in order for you to help, in order for these analytics to help, they have to understand what makes my business unique. Now, that's something that I think every consultant in the world has heard from customers, but there really is truth in it. And I wanted to give you an example. In this case, it's with respect to potato chips, of how the uniqueness of that business really is part and parcel of what drives the value process and how that can be supported with a tool like prescriptive analytics. So a little bit about potato chips. Potato chips. This is something for your next cocktail party. Potato chips can come in large and small bags. Did you know that the small bags of potato chips, the ones that you get with your lunch, actually have smaller chips in them than the large bags? I didn't know that. The chip manufacturers go to extra lengths to make sure that the small chips get into the small bags and the big chips, or the rest of the chips, I guess, get into the large bags. And there's a reason for this. The reason is that if you were to open up a small bag of potato chip and find maybe 2 very large chips in it, nothing else, you'd probably feel gypped, even though it had the right amount of weight to it. So there's something about that preference of having lots of small chips in a bag. Well, I'll tell you what, this requirement actually plays havoc on the planning processes at a potato chip manufacturer. Meaning that if you somehow have in your plan decided to promote the small bags, and small bags are pretty popular and I guess they're profitable, you promote the small bags and you get a demand plan as a producer, as a planner, that says I need all of these small potato chip bags. You run the risk of, in order to get enough small bags, having to make a lot of large bags of potato chips, because when you cook a potato, you can't control how many large and small chips you get, I guess, unless you break them in half, and that's not really an option. So you get a mix of small and large chips when you manufacture potatoes. So, with this customer, we talked to them, and their contention was, hey, look, we were great at planning, but our planning doesn't take into account the key constraint that can really get us into trouble. And not only is it a key constraint, but it's a complex one, meaning there are lots of different ways to sort of adjust how much we get for large, big and small potato chips. Well, this complex constraint was one that could cause them to, if they didn't plan correctly, have too much in inventory of a product that was undesirable or less desirable, and that needed to be, that had a shelf life to it. So the only thing that they could potentially do was either write down the product and not sell it, or to promote and sell it, which could be counterproductive, or could even be, drive their margins down pretty low. So the question was, well, what things can you do? What are the moving components that you can do to plan better around this big chip and small chip problem? And a couple of them came up. One is, can you sort the big ones from the little ones out better and get more little ones out, increase the yield? Is there something about your production process you could change to make it easier to do that? Could you buy smaller potatoes? Could you cut them a different way? And if you were to put this information into a prescriptive analytics model, and you had 20 plants around the country, all that had different characteristics. Some plants run a little slower, a little faster. They get more small potatoes. They get more small chips. If you could take all that into account and all of the possibilities for how you can manage the production of small and large chips, you could do a better job planning. And so that's what we did in working with this client. Is we came up with a prescriptive analytic that understood this about their production, in addition to all of the sort of standard production constraints, things like what are my transportation costs across my network, what are my sourcing costs, capacity constraints on production, and allow them to build plans that would better manage the yield of the large and the small potato chips. So that really is an example of a customer that really and truly is different and needs the prescriptive analytics in order to manage that complexity around what is unique to that company, to help them make the best decisions. So I think maybe the next thing to talk about a little bit, Kyle, is of the companies that I've talked about here, all these food companies, where the buttery spreads, the baked goods, and the snacks at the end. How do they get started? How do you start down the path of prescriptive analytics so that you can achieve the kind of value that we talked about here?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, it's a great question, and as Aaron has taken us through, really 3 good examples of companies who have not only went through a prescriptive analytics project, but have really adopted prescriptive analytics throughout the supply chain and have been able to evolve the usage of that tool really to optimize various parts of the supply chain. But to get started, would you jump in and just say, look, we're going to go from the start to the finish and try to optimize the whole supply chain? Not necessarily. And there's a couple ways to look at it. The first way we'd look at it, and we see some examples on the screen here, would really look at business processes and common business processes that our customers tend to look at when we start down this path. Would be things like integrated business planning or supply planning. So, where do I make what, or how do I get certain raw materials to certain areas? So very focused areas of the supply chain where we can achieve optimization results and then really expand from there. Capacity planning is another very common one. And Aaron, why don't you break down capacity planning in a little bit more detail for us?
Yeah, I think just from the examples that we went through today, it's clear that capacity planning is one of those business processes that really can get a lot of value out of prescriptive analytics. If you are a practitioner who's doing things like rough cut capacity planning, for example, and rough cut capacity planning where you take your demand, your predicted demand for the next period of time, maybe the next year, the next 13 weeks, and you bump it up against your production capacity, and you sort of think about how I'm going to use my capacity best. If you can imagine that capacity planning process could be supercharged by a prescriptive analytic that could, right from the get-go, right at that rough cut planning stage, help you understand the best place to allocate, given your assumptions about economics and throughputs and all that sort of and various constraints, so that right out of that planning process, you have a very high quality plan that is very realistic and has optimization in it and is a lot farther along than a standard traditional capacity planning. The second piece about that is what I illustrated earlier about the buttery spreads, where that capacity planning process, if it's onerous, if it's hard, if it's low quality, is something that you may do once a year and that you may not revisit very frequently. But with prescriptive analytics, having that process enabled by prescriptives allows you to run what ifs, rerun the planning process as often as the facts on the ground change. So I think that's a great one. Of the 3 that you have here, there's all stories about how you can support and make better those business processes with prescriptives.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. So, you could look at a business process individually, or You can also take a little bit of a broader approach, a strategic approach, to get that prescriptive analytics process involved in your organization. We do have customers that will take a first approach at looking at more of a long-term strategy, looking at a CapEx plan over 10, 15, 20 years, really planning out using optimization, using prescriptive analytics. And they also look at production sourcing or even customer profitability. So really breaking down the profitability, from the customer side, and which customers should we go after? How should we grow our business that way? All of that is really driven towards value. And I'll turn over to Aaron here to really talk about, the value that we see, from prescriptive analytics.
Yeah, I mean, of the three processes you've got on the screen right now, Kyle, I think one of the things that we're bumping into more and more on the supply chain side of the world of CPG is customer profitability. It's for the first time, or maybe because the technology is available, supply chain organizations are able to work with the marketing organizations to understand maybe what's my optimal blend of customers, or which customers are profitable in the context of what the supply chain can create. So what that means is, I may have, all of my customers might be profitable, some more than others, but if I'm up against, let's say, capacity constraints, and I'm thinking about trying to come up with a better mix of customers, I can use prescriptive analytics to help me understand, given my supply chain capabilities, which are the best and most profitable customers for me to sell to. And how does that intersection work? So that's something that is, which is sort of the holy grail, the extended end-to-end supply chain market intersecting with production and making optimal decisions across the two. So we're seeing a bunch of that sort of come into the marketplace as well for prescriptives. I think, just to sort of put a bow on this, Kyle, the three examples that we gave during the discussion, you might be asking, well, what is this stuff really worth? What is the value of prescriptives? And hopefully we've highlighted some of the intangible values, the confidence in planning better, the knowledge that you're making the best possible plan, the knowledge that your plan is a doable plan because the prescriptives really understand your business. But let's talk real numbers. For the buttery spreads company, they saw right off the bat 2 to 4% reduction in the cost of goods just by more dynamically making decisions about which plants make which products as things like sourcing costs changed throughout the year. And that's a value that keeps on giving because the sourcing prices keep changing, and the realities on the ground keep changing. So it's not a one and done sort of value prop. The baked goods company, that's the example down at the bottom there. They're the ones who were using and continue to use prescriptive in lots of different areas of their business. And the team there on the ground doesn't share with us the actual, here's what we actually save, but they tell us easily each of the prescriptive projects that they do, has a 20x return on the year that they think, continues on and on for the majority of those projects. So that's a real, that's a killer tell right there. And then finally, with those potato chips, that story that you're going to tell at your next cocktail party about big chips and little chips in bags, just by taking into account that complicated constraint, by having a prescriptive that understands that, that blend of big and small chips coming out of the machinery, they saw an instant savings of $322,000 per week just in costs related to reduced production costs, reduced wastage or excess production, and reduced transportation, or the trade-off between transportation and production costs. So those are tangible values that we've seen. Who knows, for you, where the value is going to come, where you're going to apply prescriptive analytics.
Fantastic.
So yeah, go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Let's go ahead and jump into questions. We've got a few minutes left, and I've got a handful of questions that have popped up in the chat room. So let's jump right in. And the first one is one that we probably hear for not every day, certainly every other day, which is, do I need to be very sophisticated in my analytics to do prescriptive? Do I need predictive or any other tools? Aaron, why don't you go ahead and take that question?
Sure, that's a terrific question. I think because of the way we presented, that the analytics landscape with prescriptive at the top, one of the assumptions people make is that I got to be really good at all those things underneath it before I can do prescriptive analytics. But what we found is that that's not quite true. In fact, if you were to build a model of your business and not have, great predictions on sales forecasts, or if you're not super comfortable with all your analytics data, one of the things that happens almost immediately is you will get feedback from the prescriptive analytics about where value drives in your business. So if understanding, for example, the supply costs of raw materials into your business and how quickly they change is critical to the profit optimization or cost optimization that you're running in your prescriptive analytics, you'll see it right away. And so then you'll know that that's something that you might want to track better and get better data on. So prescriptive can actually be the lead-in to helping give you advice on where you should augment prescriptive with the other analytics.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yep.
I think we've got time for one more. And this question comes in as, what has sparked the growth of this category recently? And I'll take this one. And we ask that question as we look at folks who come to us looking for a prescriptive analytics solution. We really think it's really two things. It's one, and we kind of talked about this, is this the dynamics of businesses changing. Again, e-commerce affects everybody, and then that just levels out the playing field in terms of, you don't have to be the biggest company. You can be a mid-size or a small-size company and compete in the same marketplace because you have access to all those different buyers. And so that is driving everybody to say, how can I execute a little bit better? How can I be a little bit more efficient? So back to those examples of, if I can squeeze a little bit of extra cost out of supply chain by not affecting my service level, is that possible? So it's really taking that use of advanced analytics. And I think secondly, and Aaron kind of touched on it there, is that data is available. Whether or not you're using the data today, you don't have to be, but the systems that are out there today, data is accessible, and then it's accessible to put it into a prescriptive analytics model to solve those types of solutions. So again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I know we're just about out of time. Just as a reminder, the resources that are in the webinar, please also visit our website if you don't see what you're looking for there, and reach out to us. Again, thanks for joining, and hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks, everyone.